Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Lieutenant Stephen Rogers here on the East Coast of the United States of America. It is 7:01 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I wish to thank all of you throughout the United States, Canada, and many of the foreign countries around the world where the freedom-loving people have tuned in. Tonight, I have a special guest, a very special guest, who I'll introduce in a minute. But as usual, I'll give you a couple of updates as to what we're doing with regard to some of the issues that are facing the United States and also Canada. I'm pleased to report to the Canadian people that we have had our first research team meeting with Canadian law enforcement officers, retired and active, as well as U.S. intelligence officers, and we're going to continue working on that research project regarding what is happening in Canada. So we're moving forward. As a result of what we're doing, there are some congressional representatives in the Congress now who have picked up on what we're doing, and we're going to be sending them some updates moving forward as how we hope after the United States Congress is retaken by a Republican Party in November, that will move forward to assist the Canadian people with their fight against communism and some of the things that are happening with regard to the Trudeau government. Now, with regard to the United States, I'm not going to get too much into this tonight because I want to give our guest all the time that he needs in order to share with us some of the issues that he's going to be tackling as a congressman. But I warned for many, many, many months, in fact, a year and a half, that sooner or later, Joe Biden is going to get us into a ground war. Didn't know where. Thought Russia, thought China. But I'm beginning to believe, folks, that the United States is getting dragged into a proxy war, and that proxy war involves Ukraine and Russia. Now, this happened back during the Vietnam War. I remember it clearly. I was in high school. The draft was on. We're all ready to go. And well before that, it was Lyndon Johnson who sent advisors, keep in mind, advisors and special operation forces to where? To Vietnam, to Saigon. We weren't going to get involved in that war. We were sending advisors and special op forces there to guard our embassy. Well, this past week, Joe Biden decides that we're going to send Marines to Kyiv, Ukraine. To do what? To guard our embassy. Sound familiar, folks? But here's something that I didn't expect, and the military intelligence personnel I've talked to did not expect, and I don't think anybody on earth expected until we heard about it late last night. Joe Biden decides, and God knows who advised him to think about this, to send Ukraine long-range rocket systems, frankly, long-range missiles. Now, why would you send Ukraine missiles that could pretty much get very, very close, if not into Moscow, Stalingrad, St. Petersburg, or somewhere within the Russian homeland? These are U.S. missiles, folks. And I've said all along, I'm a hawk by nature. We go to war for America. But I'm getting a little tired now, as well as a lot of Americans across this country, of reading about, hearing about, and seeing politicians go to Ukraine for photo ops. Zelensky get on the air as if it was a reality show with people dying all over the place. And all of a sudden, Joe Biden decides, well, we're going to up the ante. For who? For Zelensky? For Ukraine? We're going to up the ante. For who? For NATO? We're going to up the ante, which is going to drag us into a war. And I've said, keep an eye on this, folks. Hug your kids. Same scenario that we entered into during the Vietnam War. And interesting enough, the guest I'm going to have on in a few minutes, in my view, he will be elected to the United States Congress, and he's going to be dragged into a situation where he's going to be making decisions about whether America goes to war, why we go to war, and how we go to war. But I trust this guy. I trust the guy that you're about to meet. He is a gentleman. He is an individual who's worked very, very hard with regard to the America First agenda. But the reason why I asked him to come on tonight, and I wasn't going to come on tonight, folks, it's Memorial Day, and certainly we thank our veterans, and we thank those family members for the sacrifices they've made since 1776, all through America's history. And I thank them all and salute them, as well as my guest, I know, thanks them all and salute them. But I asked him to come on tonight because he is a true patriot who has always quietly supported our veterans who have fought for this country. And I'm going to introduce you to him right now. I'd like to introduce you to the next congressman in the 5th Congressional District of New Jersey, my good friend, Frank Pallotta. Frank, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Steve. Appreciate your service. Thank you for everything you've done, and I'm glad to be here.
One thing that impressed me about you, Frank, and I've said this literally, I'm not kidding, I've said this to everyone. So, what were the first words out of Frank Pallotta's mouth when he met you? I said, the guy looked at me in the eyes and he said, "Thank you for your service." And that will stick with me for the rest of my life because those were your first words to me when I met you, Frank. And to me, that I cherish and I know veterans cherish. And you are a true supporter of veterans. I know that. I've heard that.
Look, I am. My father is a Korean War veteran. He's still with me. In fact, the only thing that I ever took from him that he gave me from the war was his chef's hat. He was a cook in the Army. And when he was unloading a few boxes, when he moved recently, I looked at it and said, "What's this from?" And he said, "It was from Korea. I think it was 1952 or 1951." He hadn't put on his head since he came home from the war. So I now have that. And when I cook, every once in a while, I'll throw that on. But look, I respect what our veterans have done. Steve, you and I are not sitting here. Our residents don't have the opportunity to vote year after year after year, if not for the sacrifices of our veterans. When I said it to you, I meant it. I meant it from the bottom of my heart. And I will continue to support veterans. It's one of the committees that I've actually asked to be on when I do get elected to Congress.
Frank, let's talk about our domestic issues here in America, and then we could move over to foreign policy. And by all means, as you know, this is a broadcast. Say what you want. Whatever you have to say it. One of the good things about this broadcast and the reason why we've succeeded, and you've been on these TV networks, they'll give you like a 2 minutes, and out of that 2 minutes, they'll slice and dice and they'll put things in your mouth you never said. So this is a good thing. What we're doing. So let's talk about some domestic policies. Let's start with the crime rate. Shootings all over the country. The crime rate in New York, Seattle, Chicago, on and on and on. And of course, the tragedy that took place in Texas, which is now under investigation. But could you weigh in on this? And I know you're not afraid of these thorny issues. You said to me, "Look, you know what, Steve? I could be walking down the street. A reporter could shove a mic in my face. I better know what the heck I'm talking about."
Sure.
So let's get to some of the questions on the minds of a lot of American people. The Second Amendment. What we saw take place, obviously, in Sandy Hook and as recently in Texas a couple of days ago, is getting the left and the Democrats and the liberals are all riled up. And it's all about guns, guns, guns. And now they want to hold gun manufacturers responsible for the actions of criminals. So could you just give us your view on this entire situation and where you would like to go with this?
Sure. I appreciate that, Steve. Thank you again. Look, whenever something like this happens, it is extraordinarily unfortunate when things like this happen. Any incident, whether it's a mass shooting or it's a single shooting, it's unfortunate. I think there's a lot of things we need to address in this country. There's a lot of things that we need to look each other in the eye and talk about. And gun violence is one of them, particularly the situation that happened in Buffalo, the situation that happened last week. We all know it's not about guns. We all know it's not about access to guns. It's in part an issue that we have to address with mental illness. I think we've got to do a lot of work around how you identify those people that are predisposed to do something like this. The red flag laws we have in place are woefully inaccurate. They just don't do what they should. They should to actually point out where there may be trouble, Steve. So we need to try and identify that this individual in Texas was troubled for a long time. There were warning signs all along the way that no one picked up on. As we talked about, these red flag laws that are around are insufficient, terribly insufficient. But whenever these things happen, Steve, there's always more than a handful of people that stand around and say, "I knew it. I knew it was going to happen," based on social media, based on what he was saying or she was saying, based on what they were doing. We need to really come to grips with how we identify whether it's mental illness work that we need to do with certain individuals, but we need to be able to identify why this happens and how to prevent it from happening. And it's unfortunate that the left jumps on the issue of blaming guns. It's not about guns. You and I, again, we're not sitting here if we don't have a Second Amendment, if we don't have a First Amendment that our forebearers wrote more than 245 years ago. So we really need to be able to sit down and not with both sides of the aisle and not start with it's your fault, it's my fault, it's someone else's fault. Not start with what party are you, but really break down, Steve. And you and I have talked about this. Having a background, a private sector background, a business background, when you work for what's in the best interest of your shareholders, of your customers, you place everything else aside except for what's in the best interest of the people that, again, you're serving. The same thing holds true in Congress. The same thing holds true in politics. Is what are the issues? Not whether you're a Democrat or Republican or pro or for or against something. It's how do we cut down to the root of what the problem is. And hopefully, when I get into Congress, it looks like we're certainly going to be flipping the House. I think the last thing our party is going to do is spike the football, start rolling up our sleeves like Jim Jordan does, and start to get to the matters at hand.
You know, Frank, when you and I had discussed generally crime in America
Mm-hmm.
and some of the problems we're facing, there's always the question, well, we need to hear some specifics as to how we're going to deal with it. And you gave me specifics. Let's talk about one of the specifics you gave me. You had said to me that what we need to do is not defund, but how about fund the police in areas that will help us become proactive. And I remember you telling me that you thought that, A, you wanted to increase the police capabilities of gathering intelligence and information with regard to potential terrorist attacks and potential domestic terrorist attacks and criminal attacks against innocent people. But you also talked to me about community policing. You wanted to get the cops back out on the streets like in the old days. My old days, not yours, obviously. But to get the cops back out on the street, to get them to become the friends of the police, and the police to become their friends. And unfortunately, as we saw in Canada over the past several months, the government is pitting the police against the people. And you've always said to me, we've got to reduce government and increase the will of the people. So let's talk about that. You talked about community policing and about increasing intelligence and information, funding in the areas that will help us be proactive.
Mm-hmm. Well, Steve, we do need to do that. First of all, we need to have our women and men in law enforcement understand that we have their back. They need to understand that there needs to be diligence on the parts, as you and I both know, on government to make sure that we have good stewards out there, people that are doing the job that they should be doing. We do need to make sure these communities that are seeing an increase in crime know that the police are there to help them. The police are there to work with them. Now, again, we talked about there are bad eggs everywhere. I spent my career on Wall Street. There are a couple of bad eggs there, but you address the bad eggs, you address the bad situations by everybody coming to the table and trying to figure out.
Frank, let me, if you don't mind, I'm going to interrupt you on something because you said something that I find fascinating. All right. I like these moments when I could find something fascinating and just grab it right out of a person. You said over and over again, and you've been very honest, and you've said, people, I come from Wall Street. But you know what? You never forgot about Main Street. And that's very rare. I mean, I've talked to people, I mean, from millionaires to billionaires, but you never forgot about Main Street. I just thought of that. I said, this guy hasn't forgot about Main Street. So let's talk about that for a minute. You're on Wall Street. I mean, look, you don't have to run for Congress, right? You don't have to be involved in any of this, but you didn't forget Main Street. Tell me about that.
You know what? I grew up in a middle class, family in a middle class neighborhood in Queens, New York. My father was a toll collector, and my mom was a nurse. And I was lucky, Steve. I was lucky to find myself in a position where I walked into the right firm at the right time with the right resume, and I had the opportunity. And my dad, as I mentioned, is still with me. He's a guy that worked hard. He and mom, made sure that they swapped hours so that somebody was always home with the kids, with the family, because we couldn't afford somebody to watch the kids. So, I always remembered that my dad was the one who, would pack my lunch before I would go. My dad was the one that always, didn't just teach me how to be a Yankee fan. He taught me good, strong, principled Republican values. So, and when I got to Goldman Sachs, I was not the silver spoon Ivy League kid. I was a St. John's University guy. And, it was pretty daunting walking into a place like that. And again, my father was the one that said, put your head down and go to work, and the cream will rise to the top. And again, right place, right time, head down, worked really, really hard. I did. And I don't have the John Corzine or the Phil Murphy wealth by any stretch of God's imagination, but I worked hard and I did all the right things I needed to do. And the better I did, Steve, the more I really understood that it was about my core values that did it. And that's something that I, that I continue to understand. And that's why I never forget where I came from. The last and final thing is, I've got, a number of supporters, but many of my supporters, Steve, were customers that I haven't seen or haven't talked to in 10 or 15 years. And they reached out to me when they found out I was running, and they said to me, I always knew, and these are some Democrats as well, you never cared about anything except what the right thing to do was. And that took me right back to my dad telling me to put my head down. So as long as I'm doing this, I'm always going to be the same guy. Steve, thank you for noticing that, by the way.
Well, I'll tell you, it hit me pretty hard when you were just saying that. I said, this is interesting. And, Frank, let's talk about this too, that, I've been around your district. I've been around the county. I've been around the state. And I've had the opportunity to talk to many Democrats who are conservatives. All right. I'm not talking about, we have extremists on both sides.
Sure.
And we try to stay away from that. But the Democrats who are getting to know you are getting to like what they hear. And what they're hearing is what you just said. You're a regular guy. You're like us. You're one of us. That's what they tell me. Yeah, this guy, Frank Pallotta, I may not know him, but I heard him, and he's one of us. So he's got my vote,
Yeah.
And it says a lot. It says a lot to character. And I heard a few people on the campaign trail years ago once say, when I ran, people said to me, you know what? One of the first things about a candidate is you got to be likable. If you're not likable, no matter what you say, people aren't going to listen to, but you're a likable guy. So remember when I met you, when I said to my wife, there he is, the monster.
I remember that.
Frank Pallotta, the monster. There he is. but boy, I'll tell you. And that's why I tell people, don't judge somebody until you meet them eyeball to eyeball and talk to them. But you are far from a monster, my friend.
Yeah.
So all right. So I'm sorry I interrupt you what you're saying, but
No.
I think people needed to hear that story. My wife always reminds me. She says, you know what, Steve? When you interview people, ask them what their story is. And if they don't have a story, you know what? You're not going to want to vote for them. She's right.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So, okay, Frank. So now we were talking about what? I lost my own train of thought.
We're talking about policing and
yes.
refunding our police.
Yes.
But I do think, we need to be diligent in everything we do. As I said, on Wall Street, you look at reforms every day. Doctors, lawyers, accountants. There's reforms and rules and regs that you have to go back and relearn and reteach and change for everything. And that holds true with our police. But these are people, Steve, that put on a bulletproof vest, men and women who kiss their spouses and their children goodbye, and they may not come back. I have all the respect in the world for people who do that. It's something that I revere a job where if you do something wrong, if you're not quick at what you do, if you're not diligent, if you don't have your head on the swivel, you can die. That's something that I will always give the benefit of the doubt. However, we do need to make sure that the people that are served by the police know that they're working for them and they're good for them. And the wild vast majority of police officers, men and women who put on the uniform, they want to do that. They do it for love of the job. They do it for the love of their community. We just have to make sure that again, our Democrat counterparts, they don't revere the police like you and I do. They try and throw out the bad examples, and they try and make those bad examples the model. And I know many police officers that can't stand the bad eggs. They can't stand the bad apples and what they do wrong. It gives everyone else a bad name. So we need to reach out to these communities that need direction. And we need to take police officers who want to be the ones to provide that direction and put the two of them together. There should be, for example, I'll just throw it out. Englewood is in our district. It used to be in District 9, Steve. It's now in District 5. Englewood, from a population standpoint, is probably top 3, 4, or 5 in a 72-town district that District 5 is. They don't have a community center in Englewood. You're talking about a community where the vast majority of working husband and wives have to find a place for their children. And they've got to spend time and money and effort or leave them home, or they've got to put them together in a we need to put these children in a position where they're learning, where they're understanding that there are options in life that are not the streets, that are not drugs, that are not crime. Once they begin to get that, and once that's instilled in someone very young, Steve, then there's hope. And when there's hope, we have a future. And so one of the things I want to do with respect to Englewood is figure out where and how we can put money and resources into community centers, take the pressure off the parents, and give opportunity to our children. So that's one example I'd just like to, really spend a lot of time on after we get in Congress, to make sure these communities around Bergen County that are suffering high crime rates, let the parents know that we will provide an opportunity for their children to have a path.
Frank, one of the issues that people have been bringing to my attention is education in America. And you being a congressman, you're going to have a lot to say about funding the Department of Education and other elements involving what our children across the country are taught. And I hear over and over again, and again, we hear from the same story from the same people, from the same sheet of music in Washington. Don't worry, we'll handle it.
Yeah.
But people have said to me from all walks of life, all color, creed, religion, that we need to get back to some basics. We need to teach our children, instead of the wokeness and all of the stuff going on with pronouns, etc. Why don't we get back to our American history, our civics, government? I've been around this country. I've been around the world when I was in the Navy. And these countries overseas, they're teaching their kids in elementary school calculus. They're teaching them algebra. They're teaching them about the history of their own countries. And sadly to say, Frank, the Chinese Communist Party is teaching their children about communism. And one more thing with relation to this topic is Canada. Brian Peckford is one of the founders of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada. In fact, I call him the Benjamin Franklin. If we were to equalize him, he'd be Ben Franklin to us. Although he's not that old. And Brian, to you and your family, I don't intimate that. But here's a guy who's a founding father, for lack of a better word. Brilliant man. I had him on this broadcast. Do you know, Frank, that he was scheduled to go to a school in Canada to speak to the children about their constitution, their Charter of Rights, and the Trudeau government had it stopped. He was not allowed to go in and to speak to those students. And I worry in this country that maybe that's been going on a long time here, that if you're a conservative and you want to talk about America since its birth, you're not allowed to go in there. So as a congressman, how would you be able to help us overcome that?
Well, the first part of what you mentioned, Steve, I hate to say it, it's easy. And the congressmen and governments that stand in the way of basic freedom of speech, because that's what you're talking about, somebody coming into a school. It is by design. It is prescribed to make sure that a message that one party does not want our children to hear is prevented from speaking. And that's what we're dealing with now in our country with we saw in some colleges, we're certainly seeing opportunities in high schools and grammar schools where they're trying to limit what they want our kids to know. They're trying to tell our children, and they keep our parents out, what they want our children to learn. And, as you said, at that age, they're sponges. And I'm not, my boys, they're 26 and 28. My wife, Patty, and I gave them enough opportunity to know how to listen, to know how to speak. I want them to develop their own thoughts. We never sat down and said, this is what I want you to do. We looked at what happened in school. We had discussions at home, but the formulation of who they are as men came from our kitchen table. It came from Patty and I. And, it's something that I personally think the woke left party, they know that they have a bad message, Steve. They know their message doesn't resonate. And the way that you ensure that a bad message resonates with a young adult is you get them when they're a kid and you pound into their head those issues and those morals and those beliefs that they believe in. So when they get older, they've only known this one way. So it's one of the things that I really want to do as a position in Congress is make sure I put the power to teach, the school choice power, what our children are learning in school, back in the hands of the parents. No one knows better than the parents, whether it's a single parent or both parents. It belongs with the parents. Certainly the school and the opportunity to have a choice of the schools that you want to send your children to come into play. But when you're hamstrung as a parent, where we spoke about in Englewood, where they don't have the opportunity to talk to their children when they're home from school, when the children don't have the opportunity to go to a community center, when they're being taught something in the schools that are inconsistent with the morals and the values of the parents themselves, whether they're Republican or Democrat, it doesn't matter. But the formulation of early thought has to come from the parents, Steve, and I will make sure that we're doing everything to uphold basic principles and our basic rights. And when you're able to hold a firm stance on that, then all the other stuff comes starts to trickle down. But the real opportunity to change comes from the parents. We saw that in Randolph. We saw that in a number of communities around the country, where when the parents stand up and they make their voices heard. We saw it in Virginia, where we know McAuliffe got up maybe a month and a half before the election and said, "We need to take our parents out of our schools." Are you kidding me? I think the polls changed overnight on those words. And Youngkin won based on him waking the parents up, and the parents waking up to the fact that that party is trying to indoctrinate our children, and they're keeping the parents away from that. And we know inflation's an issue. We know crime is an issue. Nothing is bigger than taking care and making sure that our children are on the right path, Steve. I was a little long-winded on that, but sorry about that.
No, that's right, Frank. I believe, and I could be wrong, I was at an event here in New Jersey. I don't know if it was one of yours or not, but where a parent got so fed up with the school board, they ran for the school board and got elected.
Yep.
I think eventually became president of the school board or something
Yep.
like that.
Yeah.
So it can work locally. And this, we've shared with people all over the country. It starts locally. Got to get involved. And individuals like you who run for Congress, you won't succeed without the help of the local parents and the people to need to get involved. I want to get back to a little bit about this crime issue. The crime reform package that Biden and the Democrats have advanced certainly is getting a round of applause from criminal elements and people now in prison that are going to be released.
Right.
We've seen what's happened. I heard, and I know you have heard from police officers and others, that they cannot do their jobs before they transport the prisoner to police headquarters. The DA, the prosecutors are already on the phone saying, well, you got to let him go.
Yeah.
And we find out that this is a result of a dramatic increase in crime. Now, I'm not for federal government getting involved in local stuff, state or local level stuff, but somewhere along the line, a decision has to be made to put, for lack of a better word, and no pun intended, to handcuff these liberal prosecutors and judges that are saying, well, it's okay, let them go. And half these people are not even showing up and to court. And by the way, they're the ones committing most of the violent crimes. Right.
Look, recidivism rate, criminal recidivism rates is high, very high. We know when they have the opportunity to commit a crime, they do it again and again and again. We have a legal system that works for the most part if we allow it to work. We have a criminal justice system that, if we allow it to work, works. Now, do we have to take a good hard look at some of the laws that we have and some of the conviction, our ability to convict? Yeah, we do have to look at that. But violent crime, again, knows no party. Violent crime, there's no place in society for violent crime. The problem is the left keeps moving the bar on what constitutes violent crime. And the one thing that is true, when not violent crime is let to happen again and again and again, that's what leads to higher crime rates. That's what leads to more violent crime rates. And it's human nature. If you don't get in trouble for A, B, and C, you might as well try D, E, and F. So it's a vicious cycle, Steve, that we certainly have to address. But it starts with, I think, empowering our law enforcement, putting them in a position where they will be held accountable. It's funny that Josh Gottheimer 2 years ago sponsored a bill to defund the police. He proudly stood on the floor and talked about it. He proudly stood on the floor and was one of the co-sponsors of that bill. He lost the endorsement of the New Jersey PBA. As a result, him and every single Democrat in the state of New Jersey sponsored and signed on to that bill. He then saw how wildly unpopular it was. He saw skyrocketing crime rates. He saw, again, joblessness rates that started to grow in New Jersey. And now all of a sudden, he's talking about becoming the friend of the police. He's talking about trying to fund some backdoor ways with the smaller police forces. He's now their best friend. Cops don't forget. Cops don't forget when you stand on the floor and you sponsor a bill that removes qualified immunity, that takes the funding away from those men and women in blue and moves them toward other things, which is not to say that you shouldn't be allocating funds towards reforms. But when you defund our men and women in blue, we saw a huge increase 2 years ago in the number of police officers in New York who took early retirement. Historic numbers. Why? They were being handcuffed. And when you're being handcuffed and you can't do your job, dangerous, terrible things happen. And, we need to address this head on, Stephen, in Congress. I will make sure that not only our men and women in blue know that we have their back, but the citizens and the voters in those counties, in those towns, in those districts know that those officers will be held accountable and that they are all on the same side with them. That's the job, and that's how you start to change the narrative around these communities.
All right, let's talk about foreign policy.
Yes, sir.
You heard what I had to say about Ukraine.
Yep.
The situation there, Frank, like I said, I'm a bit older than you, so I can't say, do you remember Frank Vietnam? You're probably this big. Okay, but I remember.
I'm still this big.
All right, a little. But I remember Vietnam well, and I remember the build up to Vietnam, and I remember sitting in my senior year of high school, and we were talking about what we were going to do over the summer, and then I was pulled number 19 on the draft, and we kind of joked with each other, and we said, I think we're going to end up on a beach, but it ain't going to be Seaside Heights. And so I ended up joining the Air Force. A few of us ended up joining the Navy. I'm not sure, but two of the guys I went to high school with were killed in Vietnam. I have a cousin who actually fought in Vietnam, the 1st Infantry Division, saw a lot of fighting, and told me some stories that were horrific. And I'd never, ever, ever want to see this country dragged into a war that A, we can't win, and B, is a political war. So here's my question to you. I am concerned that Biden and the Democrat Congress is dragging us into a war that, in my view right now, we can't win. We love our military, we support our troops, and I think we should love them and support them enough not to drag them into a war that they can't win. Not because of them, but because of the politics. So would you weigh in on this situation? It was President Washington who said, don't get involved in foreign wars. He did say, if you want to get involved in foreign economic issues, etc., but when it comes to war, stay out of it. Frank, it's yours.
Yeah, Steve, again, thank you for your service. I really do appreciate it. I know that I was just a little bit younger than you when that happened, but I remember watching the TV. How many died that day and how many, were wounded. And, it was one of the very first memories I have watching TV, talking about the number of people who died. My wife's uncle was killed in Vietnam. And he was only there I think he was there less than 90 days when he was killed. So it's one of the toughest decisions that you make as a leader, as an elected official, is to send these men and women to war. So it is, in my mind, it is a last choice. It's something that when your sovereignty is at risk, when you're at risk, it's certainly something that needs to be thought about, needs to be considered. But the thing that concerns me more right now, Steve, is Democrats seem to look for a shiny object. 2 years ago, they had it with COVID. And from COVID, New Jersey had one of the few states in the country that had a mandatory vote by mail. Other states, people were allowed to vote in the voting booth. Smart, with masks, they had a mandatory vote by mail. They put this state in a position where people really couldn't get out. And that's something that I thought was by design. And the running joke coming into this cycle was, what's their next move? And people thought it would be, wave number 13 or 14 of this COVID crisis. But the polling tells the Democrats, you're in a bad spot if you try and shut down this state again. So they're looking for another shiny object. I don't think what's going on in Ukraine is that far off from their next shiny object. I think we're unfortunately in the position where we're watching from the outside what's going on because of failed leadership in the White House. It was a combination of our failed withdrawal from Afghanistan to show that we don't even know how to pull out of a situation. Our position on the world stage, Steve, as you know, when it becomes weaker, dictators around the world look to take advantage of that. They look to stick their toe in the water. And what you've got in Putin is somebody who is watching Joe Biden's approval ratings dip down below 40%. He's looking at a failed policy that got us out of Afghanistan. He couldn't get us out of the country the right way. When he had in front of him a plan and a path to do it, that was a nonpartisan plan to get out. So my opinion was he looked at an opportunity in Ukraine, which is wildly rich in natural resources and other things. And he has been able to fund his operation to go after Ukraine based initially on Joe Biden pulling out of the Keystone Pipeline deal. We were energy independent. We were energy dependent for 43 years. We became energy independent for just a brief period of time until Joe Biden got in the White House. And Russia and Venezuela and a lot of these third world countries are now providing oil at levels and prices that they themselves dictate, and it's funded Russia's opportunity to move into Ukraine. So I'm all about making sure that our citizens are protected. Our citizens know that their leaders in Congress are protecting them and looking out for them. But the last thing that you do, and you know this, Steve, the last thing you want to do is send our men and women to war. You don't want to put them in harm's way. And unfortunately, this is something that I agree with you. I don't want to see that happen here, but I think the Dems are looking for their next shiny object rolling into this midterm.
And the next shiny object may have started last night, Frank.
Yep.
30 communist Chinese fighter jets flew into the air defense zone of Taiwan. It caused them to scramble their jets.
Yeah.
30 fighters, the most number of fighter jets ever going into the air defense zone. So President Xi, as you say, is now testing the waters. And my worry is this. President Xi knows that if people like Frank Pallotta gets into when you get into the United States Congress, that game over with regard to Taiwan. He's not going to make any moves. And that worries me too. That and you nailed it, boy. You see the picture of the guy behind me, peace through strength.
Yep.
That's what you articulated. Show that you're tough, but let them know you're tough.
Yep, you have to do that.
Unfortunately, Joe Biden failed to do that. Now, all right. So there's our issues with Ukraine and China, but let's get closer to home now. No candidate has talked to me at length about what you and I talked about off camera, even some time ago when you and I had a conversation. We know that we have a threat to the south, our border with Mexico. Mm-hmm. We know without a doubt. All right, there's bad actors coming across there.
Sure.
And not that everybody's a terrible criminal. I'm sure there are innocent people trying to find a better way of life, but they got to do it legally. This is the point. They got to do it legally. Well, we know the drug cartel, the drug smugglers, the human trafficking, and in my view, some of the terrorist operatives, and now possible foreign agents from China crossing that border. Mm-hmm. But what we have not paid attention to is our northern border, and that is with Canada. We've seen over the past year, maybe more, that the Canadian people's rights, and I didn't know this till I started talking to, and literally, Frank, without exaggeration, 2,000 emails within a week. 2,000. We're up to about 8,000 now. Canadians that have shared with me that if they didn't go by the mandates that Trudeau had pushed on them, they would go to jail, and they did. They had a truckers' convoy, peaceful protest. The government up there unleashed their police on them in such a way. We have all the videos. We've got more information coming in that was actually, I had some of these videos viewed by New York City cops and other cops I know. They thought the actions of the police up there were horrible against peaceful protesters.
Yep.
But the thing is this. The Canadians cannot go from province to province. That would be state to state without showing a vaccine passport. They can't come into the country. They can leave the United States if they can't get back into their own country if they don't have a vaccine. Pastors, I saw this with my own eyes on a video, and had a pastor from Canada on this broadcast explain to us that police actually conducted a raid on his church during a church service to arrest him. And since they realized the crowd there would get out of control, they sent a special operations team to surround his car with his wife and kids in it to arrest him. And then a police chief gets up and tells the people who were at the protest that already left. The police told them to leave, and the people in Canada were very, very good in obeying the rules, all right? They didn't confront the police. He tells these people we know who you are. We got you on film. We're coming after you. That's what a police chief said. So my question to you is this. You said to me earlier that you know Canada well. I didn't know that you've had some business dealing with some companies up there.
Sure.
Hearing all of this, the question to you is, and I think it was, I forget who the senator or congressman was that said when it came to freedom of religion, they wanted to put Trudeau on a watch list because he was violating the religious rights of the people up there. Do you think, based on facts, not on opinion or conclusion, but based on those facts, which I know are fact, that you can take to the bank, maybe we need to take a better look at, what's going on in Canada and make sure that at least to some degree we send a message to that government that they need to always look out for the rights of the people, because it's going to affect us at some point.
Oh yeah, look, Steve, they're, I would imagine that the Trudeaus and the Bidens and the Obamas are constantly in contact with, hey, what's working on your side to keep the people down, to keep their voices down. Canada's doing, and you said it earlier, and I noticed it. The Canadian people, for the most part, residents and voters, follow the rules and they follow the laws. What has gotten out of hand over the course of the last 8 or 9 or 10 years is the testing of those limits, the testing of those rights. And we saw that happen over a 2.5 or so year period here in the United States, Steve, where clearly we had a health crisis. Clearly we had an economic crisis. Clearly it was real. But as we started to emerge from it, I think people started to get this sense that certainly in New Jersey with Phil Murphy, they were keeping more of a lid on the people. They were, again, we were one of the few states that had mandatory vote by mail. We were one of the states that were one of the last states to open up. Congressional District 5 borders New York. I live a 1/4 mile from the New York border. They had opened up those restaurants. They had opened up houses of worship. They had opened up a lot of different businesses that were still closed in New Jersey. So not only was it obvious that Phil Murphy was looking to the math and the science that worked to his personal better interests, but business was leaving the state. And again, they only had to go anywhere from 1/8 of a mile to 2 miles away, but opening up a restaurant to go out to dinner. And it took almost an upheaval by citizens in New Jersey, by voters in New Jersey, banging on his door. Josh Gottheimer never helped. Josh Gottheimer never once opened his mouth to Phil Murphy to say, you are killing my people. You are killing my district. Not once. Mikey Sherrill didn't do it. Andy Kim didn't do it. No Democrat leaders challenged him, in my opinion, because he helped them the year before by shutting down the state. We were one of the few states that didn't have a single congressional seat flipped from Democrat to Republican. And I see that happening in Canada. I see them looking to figure out, well, we'll just keep doing this until we see that, that there's enough of pushback from the residents. There's enough pushback from our voters. We need to watch that. And we need to let the Canadian people know, in my opinion, we have your back. Freedoms, irrespective of where you are in this world, basic religious freedom, freedom of speech, freedom to protest, they're all the same. These are basic human rights. I know we talk about them being, U.S. freedoms. They're human freedoms. And, Steve, we have to be diligent everywhere. We have to be diligent, certainly where we are, but we have to be mindful of everything that's going on around the world. Because my view is if some leader sees it working somewhere else in their country, they'll try it here. And that's what it looks like Trudeau is doing here. And I think we just have to be diligent in making sure that our freedoms are intact. Our freedoms freedom belongs to the people. Freedom doesn't belong to the government.
Frank, you used 4 words. I'm getting quite a response from a lot of people in Canada. We have your back. What an inspiration. What an inspiration for these people. And finally, Frank, I don't want to wrap this up. I'm having fun doing this because it's great. It's great talking to a regular guy and not some politician, for goodness sake. So now, Frank, I notice you drink the water like I do. And I want people to know that Frank and I went to the school of Marco Rubio.
Yes.
Right. By the way, when I got rid of the split screen, I don't know if you saw that, Frank. I had you on alone.
Yes.
I was choking to death on my water. So it's like I took myself. I said, Frank, keep on talking. I'm dying here. So okay, to wrap things up, one very important issue regarding our country and an international issue is the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum. apparently Biden is dragging us into some deal that could take our sovereignty away when it relates to our health rules, regulations, etc. So let's talk about U.S. sovereignty and that issue with the WHO dictating to America how we're going to handle pandemics, etc.
Yeah. Well, I think it's become clear, certainly in the last 30 months or so, that the World Health Organization ignores both the math and the science of what goes on. I'm certainly, as I mentioned to you, my background is about numbers and economics, and the data. You have to trust the data. You have to look to the sample sets. You have to surround yourself with lots of different opinions and lots of different versions, and come to some basic conclusions that, in my opinion, are based on the science. And it's not that tough. It really isn't. I think what the World Health Organization does, and 45 pointed that out, is they had their own agenda. Joe Biden has his own agenda. And I think there's this collective view of what a longer term agenda is for the party in power, the party that wants to stay in power. And if you can tweak and push buttons and levers around those health crises, those economic crises that tell a story or propose or push forward a narrative that is not in the best interest of the people, we need to hold these people accountable. And the World Health Organization has not been right recently on a lot of things, certainly on the numbers, but unfortunately, I think the World Health Organization works hand in hand with a lot of the liberal media in making sure that if a story gets out, that is a story that tells something opposite or not in the best interest of the people who want a certain narrative to get out, it doesn't get out. The story doesn't get out there. So, Steve, I think what you do, your ability to get out, the following that you're getting from Canada, I'm looking at these messages coming across. It's like I'm still doing business in Canada.
They're great people.
But you're talking about people who are great patriots who are looking to us in the South. And, I do mean it. It's not just other people in the state and the country that I have their back. Freedom knows no borders. Freedom is freedom no matter where you are. And when those rights are taken away, Steve, it is incumbent upon legislative leaders and executive leadership around the world to make sure that the voters have a voice, that the people have a voice, and that bad actors who are looking to push us down, and we've seen this go on, for hundreds of years. We need to stand up, but we need to do it in a way, Steve, that we put good people in a good position in government. It's not going to happen with one or two or three or four people, but it starts with a series of steps. And Kevin McCarthy said this to me when I sat with him a couple of years back when I ran on the first go around. We talked about bringing private sector ideas to government. And at the time, I had worked with the Treasury Secretary, Stephen Mnuchin. And, Kevin McCarthy made a comment that he likes private sector people mingling with a lot of government people, because he said you bring a work ethic that's not necessarily better or worse than others, but you bring a mindset to Washington that's about doing what's in the best interest of the shareholders. And if you think about the shareholder being the voter, you're not supposed to ask the question, hey, what party are you? Before I go through my idea, before I decide whether I like what you have to say, what party are you? So Kevin said to me, make sure that when you get here, you bring the same work ethic, you bring the same mindset that you had in your private sector job to Wall Street, from Wall Street to Congress. And it won't be one or two or three or four of you initially, but as you begin to gain traction and you see that you gain the confidence and the voters' trust, other people will have no choice. Other congressmen and women will have no choice but to look at a changing, I want to say a changing mindset of the voters, that I don't want them to look at just party. You and I both know, we talked about this. Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill could fight, and they go out to dinner and they would have a drink and they would talk about what's in the best interest of the people. They didn't agree on everything, but what they agreed on was the mutual respect for the positions that they had. And then you let the government operate the way it does. So that was a long-winded way of me saying that I can't wait to get into Congress and start to open the eyes and ears of not just the voters, that I have their back, that I will work for them, but the other 434 people that I'll be working with, that they need to understand, you better do what's in the best interest of the people that you were elected to serve, or you're gone. So that's my story, Steve. I'm sticking to it.
No, I'm glad you are. And then finally, I always say finally, and then I tell the audience, well, not really finally, but it's finally not. But finally, I do want to touch upon this because I'm watching a couple of chats here. And this is important. And it's important to me personally, and I know it's important to our country, and I really believe it's important to you. We've lost our spiritual way in America, in Canada, and in other places around the world.
Mhm.
Faith and freedom go together. God and country go together. You and I talked about ethics and about a belief in God, and never to turn our back on the Lord. And to look, we're not perfect. I tell people you're looking at the chief sinner right here. So, but thank God I get on my knees and He has mercy on me. But Frank, people like to know. They really like to know those running for office. And you've been very transparent. I mean, really wonderfully transparent. So I'm going to ask you just to go a little step further.
Sure.
And no matter what it is, look, nobody's going to hold nothing against you, okay?
Mhm.
But can you share with people, if you wish to, because I know it's a private thing, all right? So I just sense that I think a lot of people really want to know you now. I'm seeing a lot of favorable stuff on a feed here that you don't see. What about this idea of God and country and faith and family?
Oh, look, if you don't have faith, you have nothing, in my opinion. That little angel that sits on your shoulder, the devil on the other shoulder. My mom and dad taught me, and I taught my kids that there are consequences to your actions. A belief in God. I went to St. Elizabeth's. We sent our children to St. Paul's. Not because we wanted to pound religion into them, but we wanted them to know a number of things that there's a greater good, there's a greater God above us. We all need to know, especially politicians need to know that they need to be held accountable, not just to their voters, but to a God. And I'm not the guy to walk around, honestly, Steve, and you know this of me. I'm not going to run around with a Bible in one hand and a gun in the other. But I promise you, there is nothing more important than our God. There's nothing more important than our rights in this country. And I like to lead by example. I like to let people know where I stand and what I believe by watching what I do. When both of my boys left college and they moved into the DC area, and we couldn't get them on the phone on a Sunday because my son Michael, who lived alone, was going to church, and I kind of thought, okay, you know what, he went on a regular basis, and maybe when he was home and single and living alone, he wasn't, because he knows what's important. And that day that he decides he wants to go to church for whatever reason he wants to go, he looks to his God, and he got it, from me. He got it from my wife. He gets it from his other brother. But there needs to be an understanding that that there is a God, and people have a different vision of what that God is. But there is a greater being. There's a greater being that rules us. And when you lose sight of that, when you lose your direction, you lose your moral compass. And I've not lost who I am. I'm not losing at all the direction I want to go, and I'm able to do that because I know that there's always going to be somebody on my shoulder saying, you make sure that your mom and dad taught you the right thing to do. And it's very, right and wrong is very easy. It's just something that you ask, and it even, look, I can sit here and talk to you for hours about this, Steve, but it is important to me. And it's something that I'm very transparent about. And if you want to grab me, I'm here.
Well, Frank, I appreciate it. I got to tell you, this is our broadcast is normally 20 minutes. This was so fascinating. And I watched it. I'll tell you what I do. Okay, I watched the number of people watching. I watched the numbers. You got numbers here, and I got numbers here, and they started to grow, which meant that people want to hear what you have to say. And here somebody just said, "I'm very impressed with you. You are a real person." You see that? That is good. Now, Frank, there's a question here that I'm going to answer. I never do this, but I know
Sure.
I could. Why did Lieutenant Rogers support John McCain and not Frank Pallotta in 2020? And my answer to that is this. John McCain, and I said this to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
John McCain was a friend of mine. I'm loyal to my friends. I did not know Frank Pallotta, right? So you're going to be loyal to your friends. Now, Frank Pallotta is running, and Frank Pallotta I got to know, and he's my friend. So I'm consistent. I support my friends, and I support the good guys. So you see, we don't run and say, well, this and that. We just tell the truth, right? So,
when someone doesn't support me, it's my fault. It's my fault that I haven't gotten out enough, or I haven't let you know what I stand for and what I represent. So I don't take it personal. I'm not mad. I know there were a lot of people in our party. You know, if you don't support me, I hate you. If you don't support me, I got to go back to the drawing board. I got to make more people understand that this is who I am. And if at that point I don't have the support after people know who I am, then my message might not resonate, or who I am might not resonate. But I think it does, Steve. You and I run around in a lot of the same circles now, and I think people are beginning to realize that politicians aren't really there to represent us unless they can look us in the eye. And we keep using this, but I got your back, and
And,
I
and
do, and I promise I will.
and here I go again. One more thing, and then this is it. All right, one more. Because it's to a point. I have not heard you. In fact, I have heard you invoke, just by the way you're talking, Reagan's 11th commandment.
Mm-hmm.
Thou shalt not speak evil of any other Republicans. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, you go after policies, but all night on this broadcast, you were going after the real opposition, which is the Democrats.
Yeah.
And I see feeds, and people are tired of the name calling. They're tired of Republican attacking Republican, denigrating Republicans, accusing them of this and that.
Yeah.
And you did not go down that road. And I was listening carefully.
Uh-huh.
And you never went down that road. And not only did I notice it, but a heck of a lot of people noticed it. If you see what I see, all right,
Uh-huh.
you would know they noticed it. So Frank, I'm gonna make a promise to you that I could hold, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I am gonna hold this promise. After you get elected to Congress,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna take Ronnie Boy over here. I'm gonna just move him a little to the side, just a little bit, and I'm gonna put your picture there.
Deal. That's a deal.
All right, Frank, how about your website, and then we'll wrap it up.
Sure, absolutely. It's pallottaforcongress.com, and that's PALLOTTA FOR Congress.com. We've got issue pages up, and if you have questions, our phone numbers are there on the website. Much to my campaign manager, Kelly Hart's chagrin, I answer my phone. I will spend time on the phone. I used to give my cell phone out, but she forced me not to do that anymore. But look, this is the best thing I've ever done in my life, Steve. It really is. Like I said, I had a pretty good, successful private sector career. My dad, who's voted Republican, going back to Dwight D. Eisenhower, this is all he talks about. And when my dad can look me in the eye, a proud Korean War veteran can look me in the eye and say, "Go get him," and you know, he had a pretty devastating brain injury on New Year's Eve, but he's coming around. He's better now. But, you know, I'll call him to see how he's doing. The first thing out of his mouth is, "How's the campaign?" And I sent him your endorsement of me, and he was speechless. So I appreciate everything you've done. I'm doing this, Steve, for all the right reasons. I'm not just doing it for my family. I'm doing it for everybody who doesn't think that politicians care about them. I will not change who I am. I haven't changed in way too many years. I'm not going to start now, Steve.
Frank, you couldn't find a more personable, dedicated, committed individual than Kellyanne Hart. Believe me, my first interaction with her was, you know what? This guy, he's got everybody on Main Street working for him and the people. All right, buddy, that's it. I'm going to wrap it up. So listen, I want to thank you. I know, it's Memorial Day weekend, and it's you took time. You took time to speak to the people, to speak to our veterans. And boy, what you did for the people in Canada tonight, saying, "Well, watch your back," is absolutely great. So Frank Pallotta, thanks so much, my friend. We'll see you, all right? And God bless you, and hopefully we'll chat soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time again, Steve. Be well. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. You want to, we talk about where our heroes, right? I get that all the time. Frank Pallotta is a hero. He's a hero because he comes from Main Street, ended up on Wall Street, but he came back to Main Street to help all of us with our quality of life in our country. And as I promised the people in Canada, we would get people on board and we would support people who are going to help your country, because helping your country helps our country. Thursday night, folks. Thursday night, when we address the issues in Canada, we're going to have a very special guest on. So spread the word. And by the way, this broadcast has been recorded on 6 other platforms. It's going to be posted, and I ask you to spread it far and wide. What you heard tonight was from the hearts, the souls, and the spirits of the American people through Frank Pallotta. Thank you all. God bless you. God bless America, Canada, and all freedom-loving people. And remember the last part of what Frank and I talked about. God, a belief in God. Never let him down. The scripture says, fear not, for I am with thee. Be not afraid, for I am the Lord thy God. And remember, when it comes to a fight against communism and a fight for faith and freedom, there's no in between. They lose, we win. Let freedom ring. God bless you all. I'm Lieutenant Stephen